Okay, so today Mimi and I are reading from Hauntings, a book by James Hollis. He is a fantastic author. He's a Jungian analyst. He also has some amazing audio works available from the Houston Jung Center. And we're reading on chapter 6, page 76. 20 years ago, I wrote a book on all the troubling places the soul might visit in this long and unsteady journey we call our life. Swamplands of the Soul describes such marshy zones as depression, guilt, anxiety, loss, addiction, betrayal, and many other dreary visitations. After it was published, one reader wrote to me and said, "Why did you not include shame?" Huh? I thought. Why didn't I? It's so obvious. I thought a long time on that question, and am still puzzling over it these many years later when I tell myself I really ought to know better. I finally concluded that dismal as those other places were, I had a special resistance to writing about shame and managed to forget it in the list on my Hades Mystery Tour. But now I have to go there. I grew up with shame, as many children do, and as my parents did. My mother lost her father before she could remember him. Her dear mother was a seamstress, and she went to school in dresses sewn by her mother from flour sacks. She told me that she didn't know what the I stood for on her school records until much later when she learned that it meant indigent. She drove me by the Jacksonville State Psychiatric Hospital where her father reportedly once was and told me to remember it because someday I would be visiting her there. Ironically, she never went there, but my brother Alan served his MSW internship there many years later. The family was on some sort of public assistance long before FDR and the beginning of Social Security, the safety net we have come to take for granted, unless, of course, one has been unemployed too long and one's benefits run out. On many occasions, my mother publicly shamed me and discouraged my initiative in matters ranging from education to sports to socializing. One neighborhood child was deemed off-limits because he was taking trombone lessons, and anyone privileged enough to have music lessons was in a class way above us. So I was to spare myself further shame by dissociating from him, despite the fact that he lived next door. At the same time, his mother shamed him by forcibly giving him a permanent so that his hair would be curly like mine. My father, who wanted to be a physician, was pulled out of the 8th grade because of family economic distress at age 13. He was sent to work for the rest of his life. His unrealized dreams were sources of great sorrow to him, but he never complained, ever, about the conditions of his life on the assembly line at a tractor factory. At one point, around age 12, I memorized William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus, because it touched something in me. I recited it aloud to my parents, and they both said I should forget it. Life is not that way. It is better not to have expectations. It was still a culture shock when later I went to graduate school and mingled with folks there who had grown up with empowering messages of expectation. One of my deepest shames derives from a childhood moment in late August when my father and I were walking out of that factory with its 120-degree heat, the humid air filled with flying metal splinters, and I said thoughtlessly, "I am glad September is nearly here so I can go back to school." "September never came for me," he said, without recrimination, only resignation. To this day, I regret my insensitive reminder to him. I suppose this is my public apology to him. In telling the story, I am no way criticizing my parents. They were honest, hard-working, decent folks who meant well, but they could not help but share the Weltschicht that governed their lives. These days I honor both of them, and I'm glad that they were my parents. Most of all, I grieve the lack of opportunities life seemed to afford them and provided me. I write of them only now, when they and all their contemporaries are dead, so that they not be shamed further. In the face of such powerful parental exempla, some overt, some phenomenologically internalized from the atmosphere, one either serves the message or runs from it. I did both. As it is, most of us feel fraudulent or illegitimate and either wind up serving that message in avoidant or self-sabotaging choices or in overcompensated grandiosity or power complexes. In the first half of life, so many of my choices were shame-based and self-denigrating. Education, which seemed the only ticket out of this impoverished worldview, proved to be something upon which I relied too much, thus cutting off both the vital feeling function and the shameful broth in which it was drowning. This inner discord finally reached its crescendo in a midlife depression and meltdown. It also led to my first hour of analysis. My first therapy sessions were with a well-meaning psychiatrist who knew only to medicate, but, to his everlasting credit, after a few sessions he said to me, "The kind of questions you are interested in I can't address. You ought to go see a Jungian." Of course, I thought, for I had had a strong, mostly academic, interest in Jung for many years. Little did I know that this was the beginning of the second half of life, and the beginning of phase 2 of a heretofore unconscious wrestling match with shame.